Thank you. So hi, I'm Anna. I'm an assistant psychologist, part of our staff wellbeing team. And today I'm going to do a little bit of psychoeducation from some of the workshops and trainings we have available, and then look at some of our kind of wider package that we can offer staff more in generally. But just to start off with, just a little bit of an introduction of what is wellbeing, what does it mean? So one of the definitions of wellbeing is the balance point between an individual's resource, so what have we got around us, what have we got within us, to manage stress and difficulties or the challenges that get put or demands that get put on us. Wellbeing is incredibly subjective, it's very individual. So the things that make you feel restored and replenished will differ from person to person. Our wellbeing is also very multifaceted. There's lots of different kind of areas or columns that we should be considering when we're thinking about our wellbeing in general. So our social well-being is incredibly important. We are social beings. That's how we survive. That's how we're here today. And I'll talk throughout about the importance of social connection kind of throughout the talk today. Obviously, mental and emotional health or well-being is a really strong pillar when we're thinking about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our lives in general. Our physical well-being is incredibly important to consider as well. That brain-body connection is incredibly strong. A lot of the research at the moment that looks at the relationship between our brain and our body says 20% of the information comes from our head that influences our body, like our brain. But actually, 80% of the information we receive comes from our body. So thinking about how we can create safety in our body, how we can look after our body is really important. There's also spiritual dimensions as well. You don't have to be religious or spiritual to consider this part of yourself, but this really thinks about what are your values, what are your purposes, what brings your life a sense of meaning. And again, this is another definition, talking about wellness as the active process of becoming aware, so self-awareness, and making choices towards a successful existence, both as individuals, but also as a wider network of people, as society, and within the work environment. So we quite like talking about this bit because it really thinks about the active awareness and what we can do to purposely move towards the type of life and the type of people that we'd like to be. So as you can see, there's lots of different things that will affect our well-being, AVHs being, and potentially traumatic events being a significant one, which I'll look at a little bit more on the next slide. But just to give a little bit more context to that as well, so our environment, the systems that we're part of, have a massive impact. Our relationships, as I said, we're social beings, so having a sense of belonging, being around people we can trust, we can rely on, being able to be our authentic selves in our relationships has a massive impact on our mental health. Fulfilling work, meaningful hobbies, opportunities for learning and development are all really important in our mental health in general, especially in work. So having autonomy, having an impact and being able to influence the things that matter to you in a workplace are really important for kind of having, feeling valued and being able to feel happy in the workplace. And obviously our physical health and biological context will all also feed into how we feel about ourselves or our lives overall. So obviously AVHs or potentially traumatic events have a significant impact on our well-being and our mental health. This definition comes from the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic statistical manual from 2013, used a lot in mental health to diagnose disorders. And as you can see here, they define it as being exposed to death, threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, actual or threatened sexual violence. And we can experience these in a multitude of ways. So that can be direct exposure to us. It can also be witnessing that in person, indirectly learning of a close friend or relative, also colleague, or repeated or extreme indirect exposure to details about the event, usually within the course of professional duties. However, some psychologists like to take a slightly wider frame or a slightly wider lens when we consider what is trauma. So some psychologists just like to describe it as any situation or experience that has the potential to cause a significant emotional, psychological or physical distress to an individual. So these events are often completely overwhelming to us, really threaten our sense of safety in ourselves and the world, and our general sense of security. So as you can see, an AVH would definitely fall into this kind of umbrella term, but I think it's also really important to bear in mind that even threatened injury, witnessing an AVH, or learning of an AVH of somebody that we're close to, all has the potential to have a significant impact on that person. So while it's really important that we hone in on that individual and think about how we can support them, to consider the wider context of the people around them as well, because they might have a significant impact on their well-being as well. Just a little bit about this as well. So those kind of repeated incidents, trauma is sometimes called type 1 or type 2. So type 1 traumas are typically those single incidents that will have a massive impact on somebody's well-being. So we see a rapid decline in their mental health and well-being. There's also something called type 2 trauma. And this can be slightly harder to pick up, especially in work environments, but it's also called accumulative trauma. So it's kind of built up over time from kind of smaller or less impactful traumas or experiences that show a natural decline in that person's well-being, but will ultimately have the same response. When thinking about trauma, it's also really important to remember it's not necessarily the trauma itself or the event itself that has the impact, but the trauma is the impact that event has on that person's life, on that person's belief. So when we're thinking about events or situations, try not to make judgments or assumptions about how that person is going to receive it, because it's how that person has perceived that event. So even from the outside, if we know, oh, that person was safe actually because we had X, Y, or Z around them, they were physically very safe. Actually, if that person perceived a significant threat in that moment, then it still has could potentially have a massive impact on them. We know that potentially traumatic events are more distressing if they include some of these kind of aspects. So if there's been a death in some way, if there is an appraisal of a lack of safety, so again, either to our physical self or our psychological self, so, threatens our belief of safety and security in the world. If there's been a high frequency or intensity of incidents in that person's kind of history or workplace, if trauma and routine stresses interact. So as you can see from this model, our mental health is influenced by so many different places. Our home life will influence our mental health, our work-related stress will influence that as well as trauma-related stress. We are holistic beings. These things don't occur in isolation. They will all come together and influence us in some way. So also if somebody does have an incredibly stressful life in other areas, or a lot of their resources are being delegated to perhaps their home life where they've got health complications or caring responsibilities or finance difficulties, that will also potentially make the potentially traumatic event even more distressing for that person. It can also be slightly more distressing if there are strong feelings of wanting to have done more. So if the person feels quite a lot of shame or guilt about the event, that can often kind of ramp up that distress response. And again, another important point is that if there is little or no perceived support from colleagues, families, or friends. So our social connections, specifically after a big incident, one of the biggest predictors in that person's recovery and how that person recovers from that event, the amount of distress they experience, how long those distress symptoms go on for, is our social support. So when we're thinking about coming around an individual, or if yourself has gone through that, leaning on the people around you, making sure we're connecting that person to the people around them where they feel safe, those relationships where they feel really trusted and valued, is really, really important. One of our trainings that started in the pandemic, I've only worked here for about a year or so, but this training has been going on for quite a while. It's used at multiple trusts across the UK, is psychological first aid. It's a 2-hour training, and I would really recommend to have a couple people from your areas try and attend the training if you can. It's essentially about how do we respond to colleagues who are in distress? How do we respond to people who have gone through something really difficult? It's essentially kind of first aid for somebody's emotions. And we go through these 7 core helping actions. It's a really flexible model, so you can use it in different ways. But it starts with caring for that person's immediate needs. So really thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it thinks about making sure that person has medical care, has food and drink. If their clothes have become torn or kind of dirtied in some way, giving them the option to change. So starting to create a sense of safety in that person's body. Then thinks about how can we begin to protect that person from furthest threat or distress. Again, there it does talk a little bit about infection risks that you might have to consider depending on the nature of the AVH. But essentially, how do we begin to contain some of that stress? And more importantly, how do we not feed into that person's distress and make it bigger? How we begin to comfort and console somebody. The support for practical tasks and making a plan with that somebody for the rest of the day or the rest of the kind of coming weeks. Providing information on coping, so thinking about how that person can help look after themselves when they're outside of work, but also kind of think about what you might be able to do as a team to support that person. Again, recognising the importance of connecting with our social support. And finally, educating about the normal distress response, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the coming slides. So just some top tips for supporting a colleague after an AVH. And again, these are all really helpful for restoring a sense of safety in that person. So obviously reporting it and escalating it is going to be really important. The priority really should be that that person is put in a safe place, they feel cared for, and they're removed from the area. If you can, we know it's really, really hard. If you can find a quiet, calm space for that individual, that'll be really, really helpful. Because it will reduce reminders of the event, but if we can reduce exposure to noises, sounds, smells, of the event, that can be really good for not re-triggering their kind of fight and flight system. After an AVH or after any kind of violation, our senses are kind of on high alert. We become extra vigilant or hyper vigilant of our surroundings. So we're super sensitive to things like slamming doors, shouting. All of those sensory experiences will kind of ramp up our distress response or our stress systems even more. Making that person feel as comfortable as possible. So even things like access to food and water and hot beverages, there's been some quite interesting studies on how actually just hot beverages have an incredibly regulating effect on our nervous system. Warmth and comfort is really good for our body and our nervous system if we're trying to move out of fight and flight into rest and digest. Practicing breathing and grounding techniques. Again, giving that person a little bit of space, a little bit of time to come back into the moment with you. Likely our head or anxiety in general, it tends to throw our thoughts back into the past where we're kind of running over what's happened to us, or we've been thrown into the future thinking about, okay, what's going to happen next? So again, bringing that person back into the room with you. Comfort and console, so we can do that just by doing active listening and body language skills. We don't necessarily have to say anything profound to that person in order to give comfort. Not pressurizing people to talk straight away. So again, sitting quietly with somebody and giving that reassurance can be really helpful. And that works with a psychological process called co-regulation. Allowing opportunities to connect with friends, families, colleagues. I've obviously talked about the huge importance in that. Not touching them and respecting personal space. Giving time and consider rotating them to other tasks. Again, when we're thinking about what happens to our brain and body when we experience distress, our cognitive functions are depleted. Our cognitive or prefrontal brain essentially kind of goes offline, and that's because our emotional brain takes over. Our emotional brain is fully designed for survival. So if we've experienced a threat in some way, our emotional brain is going to take over, and our cognitive brain, where we do a lot of our organisation, a lot of our rational or logical thinking, will go offline. So when we're thinking about soothing any type of kind of mental distress, we really want to think about how we can tap into that emotional brain, begin to soothe that person's emotional brain so their cognitive brain can come back online. Gently moving our bodies, again, after any type of distress is really important. When we experience stress, our body gets flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, and moving our bodies is a really powerful way of kind of bringing a little bit of balance to those hormones. And again, just planning for the rest of the day and checking how they are getting home. Again, this kind of comes from our PFA training. So when we're thinking about normalising the distress response, it's really important that we help normalise those symptoms with the person rather than pathologising their experience. As it says there, it is natural and adaptive for humans to have strong responses when we've gone through something scary. The responses that we have from potentially traumatic events will vary from person to person, and they might come and go over the spaces of kind of days or weeks. And remembering that this is not a sign of weakness. This is our body's attempt to try and process and recover from an incredibly overwhelming or frightening experience. So Tom Jones comes up in quite a few of our trainings because we like to say it's not unusual. So remembering whatever symptoms people might be experiencing either then or there or the coming weeks are normal responses to essentially what is an abnormal event. We are hardwired to respond to threat. Our bodies were designed for survival. So these kind of experiences are completely normal when we've gone through something scary, because they're designed to help us process what we've been through and help protect us from further threats. In the days and weeks after a terrifying or scary event, we go through this natural recovery process where we think about what's happened to us, and we see our symptoms generally start to decrease within a 4 to 6 week period. But during that time, again, it's completely normal for us to be more emotional than we usually would be, to constantly think about it, to dream about it, to perhaps question, did I do enough? Why did that happen to me? Could I have prevented it in some way? And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of, again, the importance of allowing ourselves to reflect and acknowledge when we've been through big events, because it's really important in helping ourselves come to terms with what we've been through. So again, just talking a little bit more about that natural recovery process. So the majority of people, kind of generally over 90% of people, will experience a significant reduction in that distress response within 4 to 6 weeks of the event. And usually within those 4 to 6 weeks, it's fairly rare for therapy to actually be prescribed for those people. And that's because there should really be a focus on that kind of managing people's symptoms, trying to re-establish them back into their daily life, and really encourage them to adopt those kind of healthy coping behaviours. However, if somebody is showing either quite severe, intense, or prolonged reactions, so reactions that go on for over 4 to 6 weeks, then it's really important that we do access them more specialist support. So again, just a little bit of summary of that. Thinking about what people need and when. So it can be really helpful to start prioritising our well-being, prioritising our mental health, and planning for these, ideally before they come around, so that we can help reduce some of the impact that it will have when they do occur. So familiarising yourself with kind of the workplace policies and kind of all of the information that you will have received today will be really helpful. Thinking about that immediate support, so taking all of those kind of psychological first aid aspects will be really helpful, but there should hopefully be a bit of a focus on that, caring for the immediate needs, protecting them from further threats, starting that kind of support and comfort. After the first kind of 48 hours, again, you might want to remind them of the importance of connecting to the people around them, educating them about the normal distress response and signposting them as well. And then again, in that kind of 4 to 6 week period, it's just that kind of mindful watching and awareness of that person to see how they are doing. Actually, have their distress response started to curb down? Is it still there? And obviously, if it is still present after the 4 to 6 week period, making sure that they are accessing some sort of psychological care. How to look after yourself after an AVH. So again, some of these principles will be very similar to some of the things that I've talked about already. But I guess to start with that one in there, that healing does take a little bit of time, physical or psychological. So again, don't expect those symptoms like thinking about it, intrusive thoughts, sleep to immediately resolve. To be compassionate and kind to yourself. We are only human, and to rehumanize ourselves in this process and check if we're kind of holding ourselves to incredibly high standards. It's also really important that we take some time to acknowledge and reflect on what we've been through, to make space for those larger things that will have had an impact on us is really important. When we suppress thoughts or emotions or intrusive thoughts, it's a little bit like kind of pushing a balloon underwater. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of kind of focus, and essentially the harder we push, the more it's going to fight back and eventually pop up. So again, making space for those thoughts, for those memories is really important for helping us process them and come to terms with it as well. If you do struggle to talk to people about it, again, there's been loads of really interesting research about the power of putting pen to paper. So writing things down can sometimes be just as effective as talking about it. Not quite as effective, but still really, really good. Thinking about self-care, so again, making sure that we're not left at the end of the day just with depleting activities or chores, really trying to prioritise time for ourselves. Thinking about what fills your cup back up, what makes you feel nourished and restored. And again, if you don't find as much joy in some of those activities following a potentially traumatic event, that's okay. Continue doing them, and it usually does come back with time. Also, just being mindful of unhelpful ways of coping. So excessive drugs or alcohol use can again impact our ability to process those memories. Social isolation. So when we're isolated from people, naturally, again, because we are inherently social beings, our stress systems actually ramp up a lot. And being around people also helps us think flexibly about the things that we've been through, or think flexibly about ourselves or our beliefs. Avoidance. So we know avoidance tends to keep our anxiety higher and tends to take our anxiety into the long term. So again, thinking about how you can gently kind of get back into certain scenarios or certain situations in a really kind of gentle and supported way. And again, neglecting our needs. So perhaps things like not putting up time for ourselves, pushing ourselves straight back into work with no rest or break. All of those different things, again, will potentially have kind of a negative impact in the future. So we've got a couple workshops and we've got a few more in kind of in development at the moment. As I said, a lot of that content came from Psychological First Aid, so I would really recommend if yourself or someone in your team is able to come on that. We've got moving towards assertiveness, so again, hoping to build some of our confidence and able to assert our needs and ourselves in the work environment. Understanding and soothing anxiety, these are just half an hour each again, and understanding and soothing low mood and depression and sleep. For managers, we have React mental health training conversations. So this also includes how to risk assess. And leading a healthy workforce is starting up again in autumn. We do also have another couple things in development, specifically around trauma and more somatic practices. And again, how do we learn to regulate our nervous system in different ways? And just to say about workshops as well, we can come and deliver them directly to your team or your department. We just ask for a minimum of 6 people so that you as an area can kind of all get exposure and all kind of get the information that will hopefully be helpful. So a little bit about signposting. Health Assured is our EAP. You can access free counselling through them, through telephone, online or face-to-face. Health Assured is also available to dependents in your household as well. So if they're over the age of 16, they can access all that Health Assured has to offer. They have a 24/7 confidential line and a manager support line as well. They used to have an online portal, but they've just moved to the Wisdom app, and that's our organisational code, just so you can access all the app has to offer. Occupational health also has counselling. So I guess an important thing to say, sometimes Health Assured might not be able to work with an individual if there's criminal investigations going on or if there is kind of involvement with the police sometimes. If that happens, please do get in contact with occupational health therapies, that shouldn't be a problem with working with the psychologists or counsellors who work in that team. IAT is an NHS self-referral talking therapy service. Again, just to say, if you're going through IAT, we always recommend get in touch with Health Assured first, just because you're likely to be seen a little bit more quickly. And by the time you finish your 6 initial sessions with Health Assured, hopefully you'll be slightly higher up the waiting list for IAP. And obviously GP is a really important signpost as well. So again, that's just a little bit of a picture of what we've got to offer. Just to highlight spiritual and pastoral care as well, are a really fantastic team to use. They do a huge amount of groundwork in going directly into places after significant incidents to help support staff. You don't have to be religious to use their service. And you can also go to them to do just kind of one-to-one chats as well. Anything else? So there's financial wellbeing support, and there's also physical health support as well. So if we're just thinking more generally about supporting people's wellbeing, we have a dietitian who works in our team who delivers a lot of different nutrition-based workshops and weight management courses. As you can see, and now that we're moving into springtime, there's a lot of kind of physical health things there, such as kind of cycle to work scheme, staff gym. We do health checks, and menopause support is kind of one of the larger parts of our service as well. Thank you.